Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. In this video, we're going to talk about the housing shortage and what it is that can be done about it. There is a lot of expectations coming out of the future administration that they are going to be able to create an economic environment that's going to be more conducive to the home builders so that they can provide that new construction for the first-time home buyers or the low-wage income earners. And so I think about some of the things that they are talking about as far as what it is that can be done to create this environment. I look to Oregon because, well, for one, I live in Oregon. I've lived here my entire life. But Oregon also has a very severe crisis taking place. It got this article coming out of the Willamette Week. I'll leave a link down in the description for you guys. The title of this is New Data Shows Oregon Housing Crisis Arrives Slowly Then All at Once. So now how do you deal with this? I'm just going to focus in on Oregon in this article right now because I think this could kind of, relate out there to the rest of the country. Maybe not to the magnitudes that Oregon is facing, but the similarities are probably fairly consistent out there. Now, Oregon does have a very big situation when it comes to the homelessness. Oregon has, by its own numbers, the third highest rate of homelessness per capita in the country, trailing only New York and Vermont. So in order to deal with that magnitude of homelessness, it really is going to be much more than just new builds. There's got to be more taking place. And it goes on to say two factors really contribute to this, and that's the high rate of substance abuse and the mental illness. Now, I agree with both of these things. They seem to be quite prevalent here in the Pacific Northwest, especially when it comes to substance abuse. Now, when they're talking about how the population grew between 2015 and 2019, that was right around the time that they decriminalized drugs here in Oregon. Now, they didn't legalize drugs, they decriminalized them, which means that ultimately, if you got caught with possession of these drugs, you pretty much got a slap on the wrist and nothing really happened to you. There was a few little things that they tried to say, hey, you got to go and seek out rehabilitation or something of that nature, but it was really pretty much ineffective. And recently they've had to reverse that decriminalization and make it a crime again to be in possession of these drugs. But it goes on to talk about these are two factors. Now, how do you fix that? How do you fix the high rate of substance abuse? I mean, that's going to take much more than just incentivizing home builders, right? And the mental health issue has no chance of being dealt with outside of medical treatment. That's it. You have to go and see a doctor to deal with your mental health issues. So there's really nothing that you can do to incentivize the builders or create an environment that is going to be more conducive. And even if you did, is that really going to work, right? So set those two issues aside for just a second, the mental health and the substance abuse, which is, quite prevalent and damaging. But then also look to see what's actually been taking place here in Oregon, because Governor Kotek back in 2022 made closing the state's housing deficit one of her top 3 priorities. This is coming right out of the article. Kotek remember Governor Kotek, that's our governor here in Oregon, set a goal of producing 36,000 new units of housing annually. Now, this is a huge, undertaking to believe that you can go out there and create 36,000 new units of housing. Not just allowing the free market to do it, but to actually step in and say, hey, we are going to contribute to the idea of bringing more housing to this state. How do you do that? How do you do this, right? So despite record public investment and new laws to relax zoning, this is exactly what, the future administration is talking about. Despite record public investments and new laws relaxing zoning, streamlining permitting, and offer incentives to build. These are all the things to try and create the economic environment to be more conducive to the home builders. Oregon tried it. Oregon's trying it right now. Back in 2022, they were committed. They were hey, we are going to do this. 36,000 new units. Despite all this effort and all this money and all this time, Oregon is on pace to grant permits for about 12,000 units a year. A third of what it is that they were anticipating. Right? Goes on to say, if we continue at this pace, the governor said, the equivalent of nearly 1 in 3 Oregonians experiencing unsheltered homelessness on my first day in office will be, sorry guys. Okay, sorry, let me get back into it. The equivalent of nearly 1 in 3 Oregonians experiencing unsheltered homelessness on my first day in office will be rehoused by the end of my first term. Didn't happen. It did not happen. Now, granted, you could probably throw a whole lot of other issues that went in here with that idea of that it wasn't just the government's anticipation or expectations or their actual actions that failed to produce the situation in which that would bring in new housing for the Oregonians here. It didn't work, right? It just simply didn't work out. They dumped a lot of money into this and it didn't produce the outcome that they were anticipating. Right? Goes on to say, let me see here. The new state report found small rays of sunshine, although the second is a mixed blessing because it stems from the lack of affordability. This is their ray of sunshine. Oregon has 2 favorable conditions for addressing the housing crisis. 1, a strong residential construction industry. Okay, I can kind of believe that. I mean, I'm in the construction supply industry, building supply industry, and we are in the Pacific Northwest, so we're like in timber country up here. We produce a lot of lumber. So it would make sense that we would have a strong construction industry. However, on the flip side of that, we got slower population growth. Now, when I think about this, the state has found 2 small rays of sunshine. 1, right, a strong residential construction industry, which really isn't that strong if you do not have a bunch of people who are working. So if you had an anticipation of 36,000 new units, but you only did 12, that doesn't seem to be too strong, right? Like strong would be the 36,000. It seems pretty weak if you only did 12. Am I right? Like, I mean, is it their opinion or is it reality that they're talking about as far as having a strong residential construction industry? The other one, slower population growth. Well, when you think about how expensive it is here in Oregon, like in my hometown where I live in Astoria, Oregon, this is the 10th most expensive place to buy a home. 10th most expensive place in the nation per the population. I think it was between 10 and 50,000. Right? Astoria is the 10th most expensive. This is not a very good environment to move into. Like if you were outside of this particular area and you were looking to move into our location, you would have to have such a vast amount of wealth in order to make it here that the pricing of homes is just not going to be relative to that of the working class. It's going to be relative to those who have an extraordinary amount of money who are moving to our location. This is something that we have faced here in Astoria over the last 10 years, but especially over the last 5. We are finding that the remote workers, the hospital district is growing. The residents here are not the working class fishermen, loggers like it had been built on. What we have now is a very different form of property ownership here, and the prices of everything has moved up in accordance to what it is that the property owners are desiring. See, like, how is it that you create an environment that is going to be any different from what it is that is already in existence? Even if you were to lower the zoning issues, if you were to incentivize the builders, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work out. Oregon tried that to bring in 36,000 new units and was only able to do 12. So again, I think about it, it was like if you are going to try and create a situation in which that is going to be more conducive to the home builders, how else are you going to do it outside of making the permitting process easier and incentivizing? That's it. That's all you got. So now here in Oregon, we tried that and it didn't work. Now what? Right? Now what are you going to have to do? See, really, I think it should be more in the consideration of what was taking place at the very beginning of this article and dealing with the high rates of substance abuse and mental health. See, this is one of the reasons why we are facing the situation that we are in on such magnitudes to the level that we are, is because people are simply just too messed up in the head to try and get out there and make things happen in a manner that is going to be like that of like the American dream. Yeah? People think, okay, if I go out there and I get a job, I should be able to go out there and provide for myself in a way that says I can get a house, I can have a car, I can raise a family. I mean, this isn't too far out of the realms of expectations when you're out there basically trying to make ends meet. But yet, when you're sitting in an environment in which that the housing cost is so extreme that even if you have a good job, you really can't afford the apartment. You can't afford the house for sure. In fact, you're probably living in your car. And if you're living in your car, why the hell are you working? And this ends up being the situation that a lot of people are facing. If you're working every single day and having a very difficult time making ends meet, a lot of times you're trying to find the escape. And you start moving into those substance abuse. You start drinking, you start doing the drugs. And then when on top of it, if you live in enough depression for long enough, it eats at your mental health. So on both of these scales, how is it that you're going to plan on fixing this? You can't. You can't fix this. See, the new money is pouring in because the property owners here are not the working class people that we once had. This is an environment of remote workers, of higher wage earners, of very limited residential properties out there to purchase. And this does not leave an environment that is going to be awesome for the working class people. It's very difficult to operate in that sort of situation. And even if you have a government with the idea that they want to bring in an abundance of new construction, when their attempts fail, what do you try next? Like, how is it that they are going to deal with this situation going into the future, knowing that the problems are only getting worse? And everything that you had tried has failed or had very little success to it. I think this is a great test subject to look at as what it could look like going across the nation. I understand that Oregon has its very unique situation as far as the problems with our government and the laws that we have here and how it is that people behave and act is very much different from what you're going to find in other places in the country, especially those of a more conservative mindset. But the underlying forces that are at play, these are prevalent throughout the entire country. And although they're extreme in Oregon, I don't think they're much different from many other states that are out there who are going to be facing something very similar to what we are facing here in Oregon. So I think about it again, like, how do you bring new housing in? How do you fix this situation? There isn't one. Like, if you already relaxed the zoning laws, if you incentivized, if you tried to create the environment and it didn't work, now you have to come up with some really good ideas beyond the ones that you already had. See, I think about this stuff on a regular basis on what it is that had taken place a long time ago, considering where we are today. There was a time in this country in which that an average person could get a house. But then again, back in the day, we had an average person who could actually build their own house. You didn't have to have all the understandings of building to the new codes and the new designs that they have today. It was a very simple process. An individual who's working a day job could stop by the lumberyard on the way home and piece themselves together a house. That's not available any longer. So how is it that the average day job wage earner is going to be able to go out there and buy a house when he's competing against people who make millions of dollars either doing remote work or retirement or however it is that they are bringing in their new money that is far more than what it is that the average wage earner can bring in comparatively to how many houses are available. And even with the expansion of the housing new construction market or the attempt of doing it, if that fails, now what? This is the problem that most people are not going to see, is that they are not going to be able to create an environment that is going to be conducive enough to bring in new construction for the first-time home buyers or the low-wage earners. The new construction that does come in is going to get taken up by the property owners, by those who have the availability to them, who have the money, who have the means. The inequality is getting worse, and it's not going to get any easier going into the future if they cannot figure out a way to create that environment. And I just don't believe they can. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.